Pleasant evening, and a pleasure to introduce probably my oldest and dearest friend in architecture, Bob Marquis. Bob and I, about 22 years ago, started together at Anshin and Allen. He had just come back from Florence, where he had been studying after having studied at SC and also having been an office boy for John Lautner. And we kind of started out together, and our careers have paralleled in a sense. Mine runs about 5-6 years behind Bob's in terms of notoriety and so forth. But his firm, which he started in the early 50s and started a partnership with Claude Stoller, and it's been Marquis and Stoller, has been a very, very successful firm in the San Francisco area, and now San Francisco and New York. Their work, like some of the others, but has been a very diversified. Bob and Claude started in housing, like most of us have in the 50s, but they've done a great amount of college work. They did probably the most successful low-cost, moderate-cost housing project in the San Francisco area, the St. Francis Square project, and that's a very difficult building type, and I think he should be very proud of that. They've received a great amount of notoriety in that. They've done a great amount of campus work, and I think probably the biggest project that they've been involved with lately is one that I see down here that Bob brought too, and it's at Liberty Harbor, which is a plan for a new community in Jersey City, and this is a multi-million dollar project that they are doing in housing. Besides his architecture work, Bob probably has the distinction of being the only architect that I know of anyway who has also been a movie star. I don't know if any of you remember, but Bob played the role of the psychiatrist in Crazy Quilt several years ago. He was chosen by the director, I guess, who was at a party for psychiatrists, and he was the only one who, in the director's opinion, looked like a psychiatrist. And so Bob played this role and very well, and I don't know if maybe you didn't see it, but he had a dance through the woods, and this was very beautiful. And I thought maybe tonight he'd dance through our structures or work on that end. Anyway, he's a very talented person, a very excellent architect, and I guess with no further ado, SCI-Arc is proud to present Bob Marquis from San Francisco and New York.
I don't know, between the coffee, the wires, the cigar, I don't know if I can handle all this. I did write some notes down too, which I'll use maybe as a crutch or maybe not use at all. You always need something to lean on to help you out in these situations. About 3 years ago, I was apropos of the St. Francis Square project. I was they're up there too. Fantastic. I was invited to give a talk at the NARROW conference, which is a National Association of Housing and Redevelopment Officials in Detroit. They had an annual conference, and I was very scared, and I decided that the best way, if you're scared, the best way to talk is in the dark with the slides. So I structured a talk where the lights would go out immediately, and then I could just point to the slides and give my talk. So I went there, and I had a conference with a projectionist, just as I did now a minute ago, and thing was all set, and it it was a luncheon conference, and when it came time the next day for the conference, the hotel management had changed the room. There was no projector. There was no way to close off the room, to darken it. And I was sitting there clutching this box of slides with no talk, and I didn't know what to do, whether to run or what. So finally, I was lucky though, because there were these very erudite professors who gave lengthy papers before I did. So by the time it was my turn, the audience was bored stiff, and the talk went off all right. So after that, I went around for a couple of years just clutching a box of slides, and that worked pretty well. But people kept asking, you know, why are you walking around with this empty box of slides? So now I have a sheaf of notes that I clutch instead of the slides, and let's see, I'm already screwed up on that. It's a great pleasure. I don't know how much time you guys got, but my plane doesn't leave till noon tomorrow. So it's a great pleasure to finally visit the school, because as Ray told you, he and I have been friends a long time, and so I lived vicariously through the whole business at Cal Poly, and then the starting of this school. And the only time I really visited this school before this was one night before the building was fixed up, and Ray and Shelley and I came in and we lit matches and looked around. So I'd never really seen the school before. So it was a great pleasure to spend today visiting the school and listening and looking around, and it's absolutely delightful, very exciting. I'm ready to go to San Francisco and open a school of my own, I think. When the school first started, I was listed in the program on some basis or other as I thought it was an advisor or a resource person or something, but this really the first time I've had a chance to see it. It's really a great pleasure. Friend of ours, about a year ago, a friend of ours phoned me one night, and was late at night, and I'd had a few drinks, and I was watching television, and she said she had a daughter who was going to Cal and was getting all A's at Cal, and said she'd like to come down to this school in Southern California. So I said, well, I really didn't know very much about this school, but I said, if I had a daughter who was getting all A's at Cal, I sure as hell wouldn't let her come down to some wild hippie school in Los Angeles. And she was very upset with me. She says, you're on the board of advisors. So now if somebody phones me and asks me about this school, I can speak in more at first hand. No, I can tell them what a wonderful place it really is. I don't, since I've already lost my place in my notes, I don't really know what to tell you. The best thing is, of course, to show you the work and talk about the work and then let you ask me questions. I think I'll give you a little brief history of our firm, because I come from a sort of unorthodox, unaccredited background myself. And, I grew up in a little town near here, and at a very early age, I was interested in architecture, and I told my parents are European and cultured people, and when they heard that I wanted to be an architect, every Christmas, along with 2 pair of underwear and 3 pairs of socks, I'd get a book on Michelangelo or Leonardo da Vinci or Brunelleschi. So I grew up with a kind of warped idea of what architecture is really all about. But I got more and more interested, and I really admired greatly the work of Corbusier and Gropius and Mies van der Rohe, and my ambition was to go to the Chicago School of Design that Mrs. Moholy-Nagy and a lot of the Bauhaus people were running at that time. And my older brother had a friend, Claude Stoller, who was going at that time to the Harvard School of Architecture, and he came out and he told me about this guy, young guy named John Lautner. I understand John gave a lecture here only a few weeks ago. And so I decided that I should go work for him, and I went up to his office and sat on his doorstep for a long while, and I finally got a job. I think in those days we got about 50 cents an hour, except that sometimes paydays were few and far between. And of course, John, if you saw his lecture last week, is the complete antithesis of the Bauhaus kind of thing that I'd been intrigued with at the time. And even today, when Claude and I get into a design argument, I simply throw it up to him. I say, well, it's your fault when he accuses me of being too romantic about something, or I say it's your fault for sending me to John in the first place. Then I worked there summers and after school, and I enrolled at USC. USC at the time was a very advanced school. At Berkeley, they were still doing Sumi drawings of classic columns and things like that in those days. And I had a hard time getting into USC too, but I had a very easy time getting out. In fact, Dean Gallion called me into his office after a couple of years and said that faculty had discussed my problem, and that it would be better if I didn't come back. Now, it's nice that they deny that today. That's sort of satisfying, but that's what happened. So I went to Italy, and Claude Stoller and his wife and my brother and his wife, and we rented this old monastery, and I lived in Italy and studied architecture in Europe on my own. So I went to a kind of alternative school too, you see. I know, and we lived in this old monastery in a kind of communal life. I know a lot of you kids, think that you invented communes and you invented alternative schools and living together outside of wedlock, and it may come as a shock to find out that your parents went through similar experiences, but we did, and it was called the bohemian life in those days. So, but I probably learned more in John's office and in Europe than I did in those years at USC. Then I moved to San Francisco and got a job at Anshin and Allen, and you already heard that story. This funny-looking guy was working at the table across from me, and he kept bumming cigarettes all day long. It turned out he'd promised Shelley to stop smoking, and that's how I met Ray Cappy. By my calculations, Ray, you owe me 25 cartons of Marlboro. Anyway, Claude and I opened an office, and I went to night school to study the engineering, and we started our practice with first doing residential work. We had it was kind of a crazy thing to do. We had no particular social connections or any really good reason to start an office. We just felt we wanted to practice architecture, and we thought we'd try it. I should tell you from those, that was about 18 years ago. About 3 years ago, we opened an office in New York. At this point, we're not a very large office, about 17, 18 of us all together. We have 5 partners, 3 associates, 3 secretaries, and I forget, if you subtract all that, the rest are architects and apprentices and draftsmen, so we're sort of a top-heavy firm. Our approach to architecture, I think we always, all of us, are in search of a direction, a philosophy, kind of theme in our work, and it's something Claude and I struggled with for a long time until we finally decided you can't really sit down and say my philosophy or my approach is going to be a certain thing. It grows out of the work that you do. And from time to time we've unsuccessfully tried to sum it up, but if I had to sum it up at all, I'd say that we strongly believe that architecture is a social art. And those are 2 important words. It's a social and art, that it's an art form without question that serves the society. We, like all architects who work with the various elements, whether it's color, materials, texture, structure, space, light, I would say if I had to identify any particular things, we try, of course, to work with all of them. First of all, our first concern is people, how people use the space, how it affects them, how it can enrich their lives, and after that, some of the things we have, and I hope we address ourselves successfully to that. And after that, I think some of the concerns that we have, if you can say, above others, because we're concerned about all these things, all the elements of architecture, is perhaps space and the quality of light and of movement through the space are some of the things that interest us a great deal. I've tried to arrange the slides a little bit to perhaps reflect that. Now, by the way, I think these in all architects, these interests shift from time to time. Form, I think in our earlier work, form and structural approaches to form were more important, and I think as we became more aware of the humanist kind of interest, those things became less important, and the things that more directly touch people, such as space and light and movement in the space, became of more importance. There are really two kinds of speakers I've heard on architects. Well, first of all, my partner says architects shouldn't talk at all. But there are two kinds. There's the kind that gives a brilliant speech and then he shows terribly dull slides. And then there's people like Lou Kahn, at least to me, who gives an absolutely unintelligible, abstract speech, and you just sit through it. And then when the slides come on, it's marvelous. I hope that I don't fall into either one of those categories. I also can't figure out how to drink the coffee, smoke the cigars, and show the slides. So I think what we should do, maybe I should briefly look at my notes and see what all I've skipped. I think what we should do is go through the slides, and then maybe we can just talk about the various things. Oh, here's a good one. That was one about. Oh well. That was, as a matter of fact, that was one about being funny. You know, I phoned Ray and I said, for God's sake, what should I do? And he said, oh, just be cool. He used a lot of those words he learned from you guys. Just be cool and be yourself and be funny. And then I have another friend who phoned me and said, I'm sorry I can't come to your lecture because I have something else to do. He says, but I know you'll be terribly funny. And I started thinking about this. You know, I'm really a very serious architect, and all these people are telling me to come down and be funny. And, you know, I think architecture should be a lot of fun, but I don't think it's funny. What else did I have? Oh, well, this was a good talk. I had a little anecdote here. Or here's a little something about how long it took to get started. I met a guy at a party the other day, and he reminded me that we'd met before, and he had his own practice, and he said that he'd met me about 8 years ago, and that he told me he was about to start his practice, and that I told him that it takes 10 years to get started, to which his reaction was, it may have taken you 10 years, Buster, but I'm going to do it a lot faster than that. And but he told me that he'd been in practice 8 years, and he found that what I told him was true. And I said, okay, now ask me how many more years it takes before you're on the verge of bankruptcy. And he didn't want to know. He ran away. Okay, let's do the slides. This is a little thing Claude Stoller found impresses the hell out of clients. You pull it out. Okay. Let's dim the glims or whatever you say. We think the house is a kind of a microcosm of all architectural problems, and you really get close to them. And this particular house is one we did about 2-3 years ago, and it has spatially and from a light standpoint and a movement standpoint some of the things that we try to do in larger work that I'll show you in a minute. This is, of course, in San Francisco with the incomparable views. I remember I once had a house on the cover of Progressive Architecture, and all my architect friends came around and said, "Gee, what a marvelous site." Nobody ever said, "What a marvelous house." This is for a very wealthy young couple who is he's a poverty lawyer, so he wanted the house. No, seriously, he's a great idealist who works with the poor, but he wanted his house very unprepossessing on the outside. Okay, next slide. But when you get in the house, it opens up on you quite dramatically. You enter on this level, and there's sort of a fireplace area, kind of an ingle nook under the mezzanine, and the house rises, and each subsequent level, which is only 3-4 feet, something else happens. At this level, there's the dining room, kitchen. Next slide. And then at this looking down on the dining room area, there's the getting up to the bedroom level. Next. We have to get some, here, I'll do that. Yoo-hoo. And finally, when you get up to this level, there's a bedroom behind shutters, and there's this kind of little study on a Romeo and Juliet balcony. And the whole central court where this flow of movement was has a skylight that slides open and on a nice day and opens the court to the sky. Okay. This building has some similar ideas to the house. This is a regional headquarters for a company called Commerce Clearinghouse in San Rafael, Marin County, and it's set on the top of a hill. We had a lot of dispute in the office because we master planned the whole hill, and there was a lot of question about whether the building should be set so prominently. Business, one of my rationalizations was that business has somewhat the same role in our society that the church had, the temple had in Greek times, so that this sort of Acropolis type setting was really not all that inappropriate. You drive up to this concrete building, and you enter on a mid-level, and there was a level below, and the central level, which has the cafeteria. The lower level has some storage and computer facilities, and the top floor has all the offices, and it's designed to expand into the lower floors. This is coming up to that entrance. There's just a little bit of a rise to get to the mid-level. This is a close-up of the entrance, and this is the concrete, a close-up of the concrete texture we use, which was done by using a serrated form and then bush hammering the concrete off. Now this is then you come in and you come into this interior court. You see, you enter on this level. The interior court has a skylight that slides open in the good weather, and your movement is either by elevator or up this stairway. There is a fountain designed by Tony DeLapp, which is a 36-foot piece of sculpture, and the water comes out the top and drains down into the fountain. Next slide. Here's the shot of the roof closing. Next. This is the entrance and library, which would be at this level, to the offices. Now, we used a system of what's called office landscape, in which there are very few offices by themselves as rooms, but there are low screen partitions so that the people sitting here either get this view out, even from the secretarial pool area, the more exalted positions, the law editors and so forth, get the space next to the window. And because of the courtyard, even the interior spaces have a pleasant light and a pleasant outlook. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the office landscape approach, but it's very flexible and very interesting. There have been a lot of studies made on offices and how people use them and how unsoundproof they are and how they keep the doors open and so forth. And for this use in particular, it's very effective because these people work in teams. A law editor will work with 2 or 3 assistants on one assignment, and then once he finishes that assignment, he may work alone, and those people may move to work with someone else. So you have a flexibility that you don't have in a normal office hallway arrangement, because you can regroup the people very much at will. This is an individual law editor's space, which is divided off by use of cabinets and bookcases.
Bob, before you go into this, you didn't show something on that building that I'd like to ask a question about. I know when I went through it, I was impressed by the fact that you didn't deny the automobile, and I was just wondering, of course you didn't show any shots that way, but unlike most buildings, you're very much aware of where people park their cars, and I was just wondering if that was if you went through any process in the office of discussing that, and whether there were pros and cons, or whether that was wasn't accidental.
The cars are on the 2 lower floors, along with the facilities that I mentioned, and the decision to do that was partly not to have the cars out in a great parking lot on the hillside, but it also had a great deal to do with generating the court. We had a strong feeling that people design gorgeous buildings with beautiful entrances, and an occasional visitor comes and goes into the beautiful entrance, but most people who work in that building drive down into the garage, and then they go down some nasty hallway past a lot of pipes and ducts and through some fire doors and up an elevator, so that the experience of the plaza or the grand lobby is very superficial. So we place the cars in this donut shape on the lower 2 floors, and all the circulation is through that court, so that when you want to go to your car, you go through the court to the parking level. I should have pointed that out in earlier
It's one
slide.
of the few buildings that really does that, and I think many buildings that are done today where the automobile plays such a big role deny the fact that the car is there, and you have to go through this process that you're talking about, or you go out of the car parking, out into some other place, then back into the building, and it's really a reversal of movement that very few buildings adjust themselves to.
Yeah, of course, it's seldom that you have an opportunity to do what we did because usually the amount of car parking or the site doesn't permit, and the codes, fire codes and all that, don't permit penetrating into the parking the way we did there. But I agree with you that the car is such an important, or at least till this year was, such an important aspect of our life, and whether you go to the Lincoln Center, which I don't happen to like as buildings anyway, or whether your Symphony Hall down here, or the Oakland Museum, you name it, you always end up in some dingy garage and have to either wind your way out. And why architects have not addressed themselves more to how to penetrate and how to come out of car structures when the car is so important in our lives, I don't know. But on that building, we did try to do that. This is a design for Cal Poly Library in San Luis Obispo that we're finished the working drawings, but it hasn't gone into construction. And again, here we're dealing with a court. It's a very large building. The campus does not have very many high buildings, so we tried very much for a horizontal, keeping the scale down kind of building, with terraces for reading, with the central court to get light into this great mass, and with a very strong, wide stairway, almost as a street. Here's our concern for movement again, so that while the building has elevators, the idea is that you come to the reference desk and you get directions and you tend to move up in this way. And the most used functions are on the lowest floor, and that's how you get this sort of birthday cake look to the thing, and it also strengthens the idea of the circulation, of the kind of street going up. This is a rough study model here, which again shows the treatment of that. And this is looking into the court at these are reading terraces, and this is that very wide stair element. Incidentally, it was fortuitous that we had the court because we wanted to have reading terraces in that climate, and the librarians, we also wanted to have reading terraces on the outside, and the librarians, who have unfortunately a kind of San Quentin mentality, I guess. And I got so infuriated at one meeting. I said to the librarian, "It's clear you love your work and you love books. The only thing is, and you could run a marvelous library. The only thing is, we got to keep students out of here, because everything and I don't mean to make. I know some lovely librarians. I don't mean to make generalities, but we did have a lot of problems. For example, we wanted to introduce eating facilities into the library, and we're all sitting around a boardroom, and everybody's smoking and drinking coffee and saying, "We can't have these kids smoking and bringing food in the library," you know. So, but we foiled them with these reading terraces, because their objection to reading terraces is that you take the book and you throw it to your friend downstairs. So, but we got him because we put the reading terraces on the inside. So even if you throw the book down to your friend, he's still got to go through the checkout. This is my best slide. This is now a very small library in Novato. Again, I tried to organize these a little bit to show a kind of, although they're not in sequence of when they were built, to show a kind of, the kind of things that concern us. This is a small branch library, and again, it's organized around a court, and there are two major reading rooms. It's on a kind of noisy, busy, nondescript street in a town that's sort of full of Kentucky fried chicken stands and that kind of thing. Here, those two roofed areas are over the reading rooms. This is looking from the back. It's a concrete block building, and we burned up the ground in order to kind of turn the building inward and isolate it from sound and from the community. These are the interior spaces with scissor trusses looking out on a court. And this is the court itself. This is a bank in Stockton, California. There are, again, we're interested in, well, first of all, it's a building that's on a corner, and we're interested in the building reading from all sides. So it's a multi-face building as rather than kind of a storefront bank approach. And again, we're interested in making it transparent and getting the light inside and so forth. Banks are fun to do because they have large spans and they lend themselves to sort of dramatic structures. This building is on 8 concrete pilotes, and it has a wooden space frame that spans across and then pops up in the middle to become kind of a light gathering hat to emphasize the main banking space. Here's the interior view of it. This is another bank we just recently finished. Just like students, we do a lot of work with models, and we find it helpful for the client, but we also find it helpful for ourselves. This is a small bank in a very garish shopping center in San Jose, and we tried to treat it in a very simple, straight way and stand out just by having it in good taste and not. It's just a box with facets cut into it. It was designed in concrete, but the budget forced us to go to stucco, I'm sorry to confess. This is the main banking floor, and the flat ceiling carries in, and then over the teller's area there is the skylights, again, to bring light into the interior. This is a building I'm particularly excited about. We just started construction about 2 weeks ago. This is a building for the University of California at Santa Barbara. It's called a Learning Resource Center, and it's a building where TV programs and all kinds of audio-visual teaching aids are prepared. It's not a classroom building. It's a building where if a professor has a kind of experiment he wants to show his classes, he can perform it, and then from there on after he can always call for it to be piped right into his classroom, and as well as language programs and so forth. It's a very exciting teaching aid. It's held in great suspicion by many of the students. It has a Brave New World connotation to it, which it could have if misused. And a lot of the kids, I felt, think that this stuff is being brought to them from the Pentagon somewhere underground or something. So we felt it was very important that the students can see what's going on, even though it's not a building used primarily by students. We're fortunate that we were in direct traffic line, the location of the building between the main library and classrooms and administration. So we decided that instead of making the students walk around, we would break the building easily. It broke easily into two elements anyway. These are the two TV studios and the master control center from which all these programs will eventually be broadcast all over the campus. And these are support facilities, set building, experimental studios, and so forth. So we decided to take the traffic right through the building, let the students go right through the building, and to make a glass wall so that they could walk through and see the technicians working on this stuff, so they could see that they're at least human beings running the machines. And since this drawing, we've also livened up these other walls with bulletin boards and with TV monitors, so that the whole business of walking through the building can become kind of an exciting experience. The technicians were very much against it, by the way. We had a fight on our hands. They said that they would be on display and like monkeys at the zoo and so forth, but we finally convinced them to do it. These are our study models of the building. This is the skylit arcade that you walk through. This is the TV studio, and that's the rest of the facility. And on the other side, north side, towards the shop area and so forth, there's this large skylit area into the workshops. And this is a view from the other side. This is a building we just did at UC Santa Cruz, and it's a lecture hall. Actually, it's two lecture halls facing each other. I found to my horror when I was putting these slides together night before last that we didn't have any slides of plans and things, so I was distressed about that. But these are two lecture halls which face each other and have one common central entrance point, which was also designed to have the projection and the lab preparation at that central point. After the design was done, the university kind of chickened out and didn't put in the rear projection equipment at this time, but at least it does have the facility to do that when the techniques get well enough along. Also, these slides are early. This is a wall we set aside for a mural, and knowing that the university didn't have any funds for artists at this time, I went to the chancellor and I suggested that we have a competition among students. And for a student mural, I even got the chancellor to vote some funds for it, or the school. And there's a mural class at Santa Cruz, and they decided instead of a competition that they would take on the assignment, but they didn't like this wall. And they really wanted to paint the whole building like in Mexico. So we had a terrific row, and I went down and I met with the students, and I asked them, I said, I'm the only architect who's ever furnished the students with a wall to do a mural on. And you don't want to paint on the wall where it's supposed to be. You want to paint the outside of my building. So we got into a big, fantastic thing about whose building it really is, and we got into the whole cultural revolution. It was an experience for both of us. The chief reason they didn't want to paint on that wall was, well, one, they said it was too small, which might be legitimate, and two, the real reason they didn't want to paint on the wall is because it had been provided for that purpose without prior consultation. Anyway, we had a Donnybrook about this, and we finally had a compromise that if they would agree to start on this wall, I would agree that they could paint out through the glass onto the face of the building. So we ended up with a huge V-shaped mural, which you're going to have to imagine because I couldn't find a slide of it. Or you have, I think it's going to be in PA next month, so in a little news item, so you might see it there. It's a horrible mural. But it's a very strong building, and it can really take it. One of the interesting aspects of this battle, and whose building it was, and that they had a right to paint it, is that when it was all finished, we had a kind of party, and somebody got some wine, and we got out there with them. And Claude Stoller said, "This is really terrific. What you've done is really terrific." And he looked at all the students. He said, "Now next year, the mural class can come along and do another mural right over it." And the kids got very upset at the idea that their mural, now it was their mural, would be changed the following year. Anyway, I think the chancellor was so. I have a folder this thick of correspondence back and forth between the chancellor's office and our office. And someday I'm going to try and make a book out of that. Okay, what's next? Oh, this is a synagogue we designed in Marin County many years ago, early in our practice. It's a brick building with a structural brick. It supports the roof, not veneer, and with a large copper dome. And this is a view from the courtyard and back. And this is the interior view, and this is this inside of this dome. There's a very large stained glass abstraction of a burning bush. We try to use a lot of art in our building and work with buildings and work with artists. And the whole subject of the architect and the artist working together is really an interesting and involved topic that I think we should have a seminar on it sometime for those who are interested. It really take too much time to go into tonight. This is the Arc with a curtain by Trou de Guermont-Pré, and this is the Eternal Light, which is Victor Rees did a sculpture with a gas flame. The building committee wanted to use a red light bulb, but we fought them on that one. This is the model of the St. Francis Square housing project that we did about 9 years ago, and it's holding up very well, and it's gotten a lot of recognition. I don't know how many of you saw the new book by Newman about defensible space. In that book, he presents this as one of the projects that's been successful in this area. That's a book which correlates the problems of crime in high-rise. I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, but those of you that are interested in housing might look at that. From this project, we've gone on to, we're doing quite a lot of other housing projects now, low cost, moderate cost housing, which is again a very large topic we could talk about. But to get to this specific project, we were dealing with 3 square blocks in a San Francisco redevelopment area. On the 4th block, there's a school, which it doesn't show in the model. And our approach was to close off the streets and to park either in areas where the streets were, because that's where there were utilities and we couldn't build anyway, or which would be a case like here and here, or on the periphery we have 2 parking structures. By doing that, we could have relatively low 3-story buildings that with the first floor on the ground that centered, turned inward and on a central area with no cars. Now, we achieved several things with this. First of all, greater economy, certainly, than parking under the buildings or somehow accommodating the car. And secondly, that all our ground floor units could have gardens. And almost all, I should say. And third of all, that you end up with sort of an 8-acre super block with a school in one corner of it, so that from a quality of living there, from that standpoint, it's been an extremely successful project. If you ask me later, I'll look it up. 24, 27 units per acre? Help me out, Ray.
No, it should be in the 20s.
300 units divided by 8 acres or something. What do you get?
It's over 30.
It's around 27 units an acre, I think, not counting the school. I'll look it up for you afterwards. I'm sorry, I forget. How expensive are the rents? The rents, of course, this is also, it's cooperative. The rents are very low. A 3-bedroom, 2-bath apartment was at that time was $500 down and $135 a month. Now, an interesting thing has happened, because one of the things we did here, and this is where you get into sort of social planning, we and the clients went to Washington because of the equity problem. Before this project, people could not have equity in these kind of moderate income projects. Now, in this project, people do carry their equity, and if you wanted to buy a unit today, you would have to pay $2,000 down. And this has created a problem because of the kind of people they want and the kind of people who meet the income limitations. $2,000 down payment is a hell of a lot of money. So the co-op is talking about the possibility of forming a loan group to actually loan people the money so that they can make the down payment.
This started out as a replacement for a ghetto area. Is it still occupied to some degree by blacks, or is it changed?
The original people who lived here, the real ghetto residents, were displaced. And even at those rents of $500 and $135, couldn't hope to have them move in, even though they had kind of phony priority certificates. I'll call them phony. They had priority certificates if they could find the people. Theoretically, they were supposed to move in. On the other hand, so the answer is no. On the other hand, the project has made a terrific effort at being an integrated. It's a very successfully integrated project. Again, I have a fact sheet. When the lights go on, I can read you the statistics. I mean, it's not token integrated. It's something like 35% black and so forth. I have those statistics. There's a very interesting study done by a sociologist at Berkeley, Clare Cooper, in which she goes into the, she moved into the project after doing this study. But she goes into the project and she tests how people have reacted to the various things, and it's very interesting, especially from the standpoint. Maybe we can talk about that with one of the next slides. This one just shows this is one of the streets that was closed off. I'll return to that other point in a minute. I was hoping to do it with a slide. When we closed off the streets, we found it was very interesting because to us it seemed like a very obvious kind of a planning solution. You close off the streets, and we never realized how many people had a vested interest in the streets. The police department, the fire department, the mailman, the parcel post, the taxi drivers, everyone descended down on us. This then is closed off by bollards up here and remains as a street for emergency vehicles, but it's not really used by cars. Next slide. Let's go back just on this one, because I want to address myself to the question that was asked previously. Just on this side here. The Clare Cooper study finds some very interesting things that happened